Ethan Vale had repaired reactor coolant regulators while pirates were firing at the station, recalibrated gravity plates during an earthquake on Mars, and once crawled through a ventilation shaft beside a malfunctioning sanitation drone that had developed what it considered a personality. None of those experiences prepared him for the silence of the Hall of Eternal Records. The archive beneath the Imperial Palace seemed less like a building and more like the inside of a sleeping machine. Black crystalline pillars rose into darkness, each one threaded with faint silver light. Holographic symbols floated over sealed alcoves, rotating slowly in a language Ethan's translator could not identify. Somewhere beneath the floor, ancient machinery produced a vibration so soft he felt it through his boots rather than heard it. He glanced at the environmental regulator mounted beside a column and sighed. 3,000 years of technological progress, he muttered, and somebody still forgets to clean the intake filter. The Imperial scholars around him did not laugh. They stood several meters away, as if humor might damage the artifacts. Queen Seralyne did. It was only a small sound, quickly hidden behind one elegant hand, but Ethan noticed. The Queen looked almost entirely human at first glance. Pale skin, calm grey eyes, and long blonde hair arranged beneath a narrow metallic crown. Only her long pointed ears revealed that she belonged to the Asterian species. She wore dark royal armor beneath a blue ceremonial mantle, an unusual choice for someone visiting an archive, though Ethan had learned that Asterian queens apparently considered personal protection a reasonable accessory to historical research. Professor Delran, the archive's chief scholar, cleared his throat. Technician Vale, please remember that several systems within this chamber predate the current empire. Yes, Professor. Some are irreplaceable. Yes, Professor. Some may contain technologies we do not understand. Ethan looked at him. Are you asking me to repair the machine or apologize to it? Seralyne turned away, unsuccessfully hiding another smile. Ethan opened the regulator panel. The problem was insultingly simple. Dust from the crystal ventilation shafts had accumulated around an old thermal sensor. He removed it, cleaned the contacts, and watched the temperature readings stabilize. Done. Delran blinked. Already? Sometimes ancient mysteries are just dirty equipment. A low mechanical sound rolled through the chamber. Ethan slowly looked upward. Please tell me that wasn't me. No one answered. The vibration beneath the floor strengthened. Lines of silver light appeared between the tiles, racing outward in perfect geometric patterns. One by one, the black crystalline pillars illuminated from within. Blue-white energy spiraled upward through them until the enormous chamber, dark for centuries, became bright enough to reveal a vaulted ceiling filled with dormant machinery. Every scholar froze. Queen Seralyne's hand moved toward the weapon at her hip. Ethan, she said quietly, what did you touch? Technically, dust. A panel beside him opened. Behind it stood a flat surface of black metal, perfectly smooth, except for the outline of a human-sized hand, glowing faintly at its center. Delran inhaled sharply. That interface has never responded before. Ethan stared at it. Seralyne immediately said, Don't. I wasn't going to. The hand symbol brightened. Ethan frowned. It was exactly the shape of his palm. Oh, that's suspicious. Ethan. I know. Something inside him shifted. Not physically. It felt like remembering a place he had never visited. For a fraction of a second he saw red stars over a battlefield. Vast ships burned in silence. Someone shouted a name through static. Kael. Ethan stepped backward. The image vanished. Seralyne saw his expression change. What happened? Nothing. That was not a nothing face. I have several nothing faces. Before anyone could stop him, the interface emitted a pulse of light. Ethan instinctively raised his hand. His palm touched the metal. The entire archive awakened. A thunderous wave of energy passed through the chamber. Thousands of symbols ignited across the walls. Holographic constellations exploded into existence overhead, spreading until the ceiling became a living map of the galaxy. Planets appeared, trade routes formed, then older routes appeared beneath them, vast networks crossing regions modern civilization considered unexplored. The scholars began shouting. Security officers rushed toward the Queen. Ethan could only stare upward. The stars looked familiar. That frightened him more than anything else. A circular platform rose from the floor at the center of the hall. Light gathered above it, forming the translucent figure of a tall, armored man. The hologram flickered, dissolved, and transformed into a geometric sphere surrounded by rotating rings. A voice filled the chamber. Ancient, artificial, calm. Strategic intelligence ORION restoring primary systems. Delran whispered, "Impossible." The sphere rotated toward Ethan. Biological recognition confirmed. Every person in the chamber fell silent. Ethan's stomach tightened. The AI continued. Command genetic signature verified. Seralyne looked from the machine to Ethan. "What command signature?" Orion's light intensified. Then the 1,000-year-old intelligence spoke with absolute certainty. Commander Kael Varos. A pause followed. The legendary warrior has returned. The silence afterward was so complete, Ethan could hear the cooling fan inside his toolkit. Slowly, every scholar, soldier, and royal advisor turned toward him. Even Seralyne stared. Ethan looked around at the gathered faces, then back at the glowing AI. He lifted one finger. "I feel obligated to mention," he said, "that I was born 34 years ago." No one laughed. Orion answered immediately. "Incorrect." Ethan lowered his hand. "Well," he murmured, "that's going to be annoying." The Hall of Eternal Records remained sealed for 47 minutes after Orion called Ethan Vale a dead commander. And in that time, Ethan discovered there were few experiences more uncomfortable than standing in a room full of people who had silently decided he might be a historical catastrophe. Queen Seralyne ordered the palace security grid activated, shutting every entrance beneath several layers of quantum encryption. The scholars were instructed to remain calm, which had the immediate effect of making them noticeably less calm. Professor Delran paced near the crystalline pillars, whispering calculations into his wrist console, while two royal guards kept their weapons lowered, but very obviously ready. Ethan sat on the edge of his toolbox and watched the glowing sphere of Orion rotate above the central platform. "So," he finally said, "are we all pretending this is normal, or should someone officially begin panicking?" Seralyne stood opposite him, arms folded. Her long ears twitched slightly, an Asterian gesture Ethan had learned usually meant irritation, suspicion, or occasionally terrible music. "No one is panicking." A scholar behind her dropped a data slate. Seralyne glanced back. "Quietly, at least." Ethan rubbed his face. "Good. I prefer professional panic." Orion pulsed with pale light. "Commander Kael Varos, psychological stress indicators elevated by 18%. Ethan looked up. "Stop calling me that." "Identity confirmed." "Identity disputed." "Dispute rejected." Ethan pointed toward the machine. "See? This is why people unplug old computers." Delran nearly choked. "You cannot unplug a strategic intelligence from the first Imperial age." That sounds exactly like something people said shortly before it became a problem. Seralyne stepped between them before the argument could become theological. "Orion, state the basis of your identification." The sphere expanded, projecting rings of symbols into the air. A beam passed over Ethan from head to toe, warm enough to make his skin prickle. Biometric morphology, 31% correlation. Neural electromagnetic pattern, 64% correlation. Genetic command sequence, 99.987% correlation. Delran stopped pacing. "That is impossible." "I am beginning to dislike that word," Ethan said. Seralyne's expression hardened. "Explain the genetic command sequence." Orion projected a rotating strand of DNA above them. Most of it appeared ordinary, familiar to Ethan from medical scans, but several sections glowed gold. Encoded within subject genome are dormant mnemonic structures utilizing quantum-stabilized protein folding. Designation: Helix Archive Protocol. Nobody spoke for several seconds. Ethan stared at the holographic strand. "You're saying someone put files in my DNA? Simplified interpretation accepted. Great. My ancestors used themselves as storage drives." Orion ignored him. Mnemonic structures contain partial strategic, navigational, tactical, and autobiographical memory architecture belonging to Commander Kael Varos. Delran stepped closer to the projection, awe replacing fear. "Genetic memory cannot preserve detailed experience across generations. Not with this fidelity." "Your technology cannot," Orion replied. The professor actually looked offended. Seralyne almost smiled. Ethan did not. A pressure was building behind his eyes. The gold sections of the holographic DNA seemed strangely familiar, and then the room vanished. For one impossible heartbeat, he stood somewhere else. A red giant filled half a black sky. Warships burned above a shattered moon. His hands were not his hands. They were covered in dark, segmented armor, one gripping the edge of a command table while warning symbols flashed around him. Someone shouted through smoke, "Commander, the Hollow Fleet has breached the southern gate!" Another voice answered, and Ethan realized with terror that it came from his own mouth. "Seal the corridor! No retreat beyond Arcturus!" The vision broke. Ethan staggered backward and struck a crystal pillar. Seralyne caught his arm before he fell. "Ethan." He blinked rapidly. The archive returned around him. "I saw something." Delran raised his scanner immediately. "What?" Ethan swallowed. "A battle. Ships. A star. Someone called me Commander." Seralyne's grip tightened slightly. "Did you recognize the place?" Ethan looked toward the galactic map overhead. Without knowing why, he lifted his hand and pointed toward a dark region near the edge of charted space. The hologram responded instantly. Stars shifted. Coordinates appeared. Orion's voice became quieter. Memory pathway activation confirmed. Delran stared at the location. "There is nothing there. That sector has never been explored." "Incorrect," Orion said. "It was abandoned." The word fell heavily through the hall. Seralyne released Ethan's arm and turned toward the AI. "Abandoned by whom?" The sphere rotated, and a new image appeared. A man in ancient black armor standing before ranks of soldiers. The face was damaged by corrupted data, but the body was unmistakably human. Ethan felt cold. Orion answered, "By your people." Delran whispered, "Asterians?" "Negative." The AI turned its light toward Ethan. "Humans." Silence returned, deeper than before. Seralyne slowly looked at Ethan. Humanity, according to every accepted galactic record, had discovered faster-than-light travel only 83 years earlier. Yet above them floated a 1,000-year-old military image of a human commander. Ethan stared at the ruined face in the hologram, and something inside his mind whispered a name before Orion could speak it. Kael Varos. Ethan closed his eyes. "I'm going to need a very strong drink." Orion responded at once. Commander Varos prohibited alcohol before strategic briefings. Ethan opened one eye. "I already hate my previous life." By the time Queen Seralyne authorized the descent into the restricted levels of the archive, Ethan had already been scanned 11 times, questioned by 3 ministers, and politely informed by Professor Delran that his DNA had become historically significant. Ethan decided this was an unnecessarily elegant way of saying everyone wanted a sample of him. The elevator that carried them downward was not part of the modern palace. It was a circular platform of dark alloy with no visible controls, activated only when Ethan stepped onto it. Seralyne entered after him, followed by Delran, Commander Tarek, and 2 royal guards. "Comforting," Ethan muttered as the platform began falling silently through kilometers of stone. "No buttons, no emergency brake, and apparently I am the key." Tarek glanced at him. "You make jokes when nervous." "No, I make jokes constantly. Nervousness just improves production speed." Seralyne's long ears tilted slightly as she hid a smile. The descent ended in a chamber so vast their lights could not reach its ceiling. Ancient machines stood in rows like sleeping giants, their surfaces covered with symbols that ignited as Ethan passed. A door ahead opened before anyone touched it. Then another. Then another. Delran stopped pretending to be calm. These systems have ignored every Imperial access attempt for 6 centuries. Ethan looked over his shoulder. "Maybe you weren't asking nicely." The next corridor narrowed into a long tunnel lined with black statues. At first, Ethan assumed they were ceremonial figures. Then one moved. Metal unfolded from its shoulders with a grinding sound. Red light appeared behind a featureless face. The royal guards raised their rifles instantly. Tarek stepped forward. "Defensive construct." Ethan froze. The machine was nearly 3 meters tall, built from layered armor scarred by impacts old enough to qualify as archaeology. A weapon rotated out of its forearm. Seralyne drew a compact plasma pistol, her expression suddenly hard. "Ethan, step back." Excellent suggestion. Before he could move, the construct turned toward him. Its weapon retracted. It dropped to one knee with enough force to crack the floor. "Commander Varos recognized." Ethan stared down at it. "Of course." Delran looked delighted. "Extraordinary." "You say extraordinary. I say deeply inconvenient." The construct raised its head. "Awaiting orders." Ethan pointed at himself. "My first order is stop doing that." "Clarify." "The kneeling." "Command rank requires acknowledgement." Ethan sighed. "Fine. Acknowledge me emotionally." Seralyne actually laughed this time. Even Tarek's mouth twitched. The machine rose and turned toward a sealed door at the end of the corridor. "Primary war archive available." Orion's voice came through the walls. "Authorization granted through genetic successor." The door opened with a rush of cold air. Beyond it stood a circular chamber filled with suspended crystalline spheres, thousands of them, orbiting a central projector. Holograms erupted around the group. Fleets crossing unfamiliar star systems, enormous stations built inside asteroids, cities floating above gas giants. Delran whispered, "None of this exists in known history." Ethan stepped closer to one projection. Humans filled the image. Not primitive humans. Soldiers in powered armor, engineers standing beside gravity vessels, children walking beneath artificial suns. Seralyne's expression changed from curiosity to disbelief. "How old are these records?" Orion answered, 2,941 standard years. Delram looked physically offended by reality. "Humanity did not possess interstellar travel then." "Correction," Orion said. "Humanity abandoned interstellar travel then." The room darkened. A new hologram appeared, Commander Kael Varos standing before a tactical map. His face was still partially corrupted, but his proportions were unmistakably human. Following the Hollow War, Commander Varos initiated the Silence Protocol. Seralyne stepped forward. "What was the Silence Protocol?" "Systematic withdrawal of human civilization from galactic space, destruction of navigational records, suppression of advanced technology, genetic preservation of strategic knowledge." Ethan stared at the ancient commander. Why would anyone erase their own civilization? Orion hesitated. That hesitation frightened him more than any answer could have. Because survival required invisibility. Tarek's eyes narrowed.
Invisible from what? Before Orion responded, every light in the chamber turned red. A sharp alarm pierced the air. The kneading construct snapped upright. Unauthorized biological signatures detected. Tarek raised his rifle.
How many?
12. A distant explosion shook dust from the ceiling. Seralyne's guards moved around her.
Ethan looked toward the corridor they had entered through and saw smoke already creeping beneath the door. I assume they're not historians. Tarek checked his weapon. Assassins rarely are. Another explosion struck closer. Orion projected a map showing intruders moving rapidly through the restricted levels. They were not searching randomly. They were heading directly toward the war archive. Ethan felt another flash behind his eyes. Corridors, defensive routes, kill zones. He knew this place. Not intellectually, instinctively. His hand moved toward a panel hidden in the wall. He pressed 3 symbols without knowing what they meant. The floor shifted. Sections of the corridor rotated, sealing 3 passages and opening another. Everyone stared at him. Ethan stared at his own hand. I would like to officially state that I have no idea how I did that. Orion replied, Commander Varos designed this facility. Ethan exhaled slowly. Naturally. The first impact struck the sealed door. Seralyne lifted her pistol. Ethan looked toward the advancing red markers on the holographic map, and somewhere inside his mind, an ancient tactical instinct awakened. For the first time, the memory did not feel like a vision. It felt useful. Tarek, he said quietly, tell your guards to move away from the east wall. The commander frowned. Why? Ethan touched another symbol. Hidden gravity nodes powered up behind the metal. Because in about 10 seconds, he said, that wall is going to become the ceiling of command armor. The names of soldiers who had been dead for nearly 3,000 years. Worse, some memories carried emotion. Grief that was not his. Anger that was not his. Love for people he had never met. What happens, he asked quietly, if enough of him wakes up? Seralyne did not answer immediately. Then we make sure you remember who you are. Ethan gave her a tired smile. Very reassuring, slightly vague. Royalty excels at vague reassurance. He laughed despite himself. It helped. By midday, secrecy had failed completely. Someone had leaked Orion's identification of Ethan to the Imperial Senate. Within hours, every major information network in the capital was running versions of the same story. Human technician may be ancient warlord. Legendary commander returns. Palace hides living relic. Ethan preferred the third one. It made him sound expensive. Unfortunately, the Senate took matters more seriously. Ministers demanded access to him. Military officials argued that Kael's recovered knowledge should be placed under strategic authority. A religious delegation requested permission to examine whether his existence fulfilled a prophecy written after the fact. Ethan rejected that one personally. Seralyne summoned the High Council to the royal chamber before panic could harden into policy. Ethan stood beside her beneath a floating holographic seal, while dozens of senators appeared as projected figures around the circular hall. Some looked frightened, others looked hungry. Senator Korvek, an elderly Asterian with silver markings along his long ears, spoke first. Your Majesty, this man carries military knowledge belonging to a commander who controlled technologies beyond anything possessed by the Empire. He cannot remain an ordinary civilian. I was doing a surprisingly good job at it until yesterday, Ethan said. Korvek ignored him. He should be transferred to military custody. No, Seralyne replied. The single word cut through the chamber. Another senator raised her voice. If Commander Varos is re-emerging, Ethan Vale, Seralyne said, is not Commander Varos. Orion's voice suddenly entered through the palace network. Statement partially correct. Ethan looked upward. Nobody invited you. I am integrated with archive communications. That sounds like a technical way of saying you are eavesdropping. Correct. Several senators stared at him in disbelief. Seralyne almost smiled. Explain, she ordered. Orion projected Kael's genetic archive protocol above the chamber. Subject Vale possesses inherited mnemonic data. He is not a reconstructed consciousness. No complete personality transfer exists. Ethan exhaled. Then Orion added, probability of psychological identity conflict remains significant. Ethan looked up again. You really know how to ruin a good moment. After the council ended, Seralyne took him to a quiet balcony overlooking Valora's capital. Thousands of aerial vehicles moved between towers of glass and living crystal. Artificial moons drifted above the skyline, regulating weather and tidal systems. For a while, neither spoke. I'm afraid, Ethan finally admitted. Seralyne looked at him. Not of dying. Of waking up one morning and caring more about Kael's memories than my own. You repaired an environmental regulator with a spoon last month. It was an insulated tool. It came from the dining hall. Still worked. That, she said, is Ethan Vale. Kael Varos would probably have ordered a technician to bring the correct instrument. Ethan smiled. So stubborn incompetence is my anchor. Creative incompetence. A warning tone interrupted them. Orion materialized in miniature above Ethan's wrist communicator. Priority alert. The humor vanished immediately. A star map opened between them. A pulse blinked near the edge of known space. Signal origin? Seralyne asked. Arcturus containment region. Ethan felt the memory inside him react before Orion spoke again. The same cold, the same impossible darkness. Dimensional barrier integrity has decreased by 12%. Seralyne's face tightened. Cause? External activation. Ethan stared at the pulsing marker. Somewhere behind his eyes, Kael's final memory began to move. They found the gate, he whispered. Orion answered. Confirmed. A second signal appeared beside the first, then a third. The Continuity Council has begun opening the Arcturus barrier. Ethan looked at Seralyne. This time there was no joke waiting, only recognition. They think they can control what's behind it. Orion's light dimmed. Historical probability of success, 0.003%. Ethan swallowed. That's bad. Correct. How bad? The AI projected thousands of dead star systems. Civilization ending. Arcturus Gate looked less like a battlefield than the graveyard of a civilization that had tried to fight mathematics. Broken warships drifted around the dead star in slow, silent spirals, some kilometers long, others little more than twisted ribs of black alloy. Their hulls reflected the pale glow of the Imperial task force as Queen Seralyne's ships emerged from faster-than-light transit, one after another. Ethan stood on the command deck beside her, staring through the forward viewport at a structure that occupied half the sky. The dimensional barrier was not a wall. It was a ring of shattered moons held together by threads of blue-white energy, each fragment orbiting a darkness that seemed deeper than space itself. That, Ethan said quietly, is considerably worse than the diagrams. Seralyne folded her arms. You sound disappointed. I prefer ancient disasters to look smaller in person. Orion's holographic sphere floated between them. Barrier integrity, 68% and declining. Commander Tarek turned from the tactical console. Continuity vessels detected near the inner ring, 27 ships. Ethan glanced at the display. Of course there are 27. Villains never arrive in a reasonable number. Seralyne gave him a look. You are joking again. Yes. Good. She faced the viewport. I was beginning to worry. The fleet advanced carefully through the wreckage. As they crossed the remains of an ancient human cruiser, Ethan's vision blurred. A memory struck with such force he gripped the railing. For one heartbeat, the broken vessel was whole again. Gun batteries flashed along its hull. Thousands of fighters streamed past. Kael stood where Ethan now stood, shouting commands while the stars ahead filled with moving black shapes. Ethan saw them clearly this time. Enormous biomechanical vessels covered in segmented armor, their surfaces shifting like living tissue beneath metal. The Hollow Fleet. Then the memory changed. Kael was alone in a chamber beneath Arcturus Gate. Around him stood 12 officers, all human. No aliens, no legendary beings, just exhausted people who knew they were losing. "We cannot destroy them," one officer said. Kael answered, "Then we remove ourselves from their map." Ethan felt the meaning before the memory showed it. The silence protocol had never been cowardice. Humanity had dismantled its own interstellar civilization because the Hollow Fleet tracked quantum communication signatures across enormous distances. Every advanced network, every active gate, every high-energy beacon became a flare in the dark. And then Ethan understood the second secret. Kael had known the barrier might eventually fail, so he had encoded knowledge into bloodlines, not himself. Knowledge. Ethan opened his eyes. Seralyne was holding his arm. "What did you see?" He looked at her, breathing hard. "I'm not his replacement." Orion rotated toward him. "The distinction is accurate." Ethan laughed once, mostly from relief. "You could have mentioned that earlier." Information was unavailable until mnemonic sequence completion. "Convenient." He turned toward the tactical display. Kael didn't try to preserve his personality. He preserved strategies, coordinates, engineering principles, enough for someone in the future to finish what he couldn't. Tarek frowned. "Someone like you." "No, someone human." Ethan pointed toward the genetic diagram Orion projected beside him. This wasn't a resurrection system. It was a distributed archive. Seralyne's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. "How many bloodlines?" Orion answered, "Original estimate, 412. Ethan stared at the AI. "There are others?" "Potentially." He almost laughed again. "Fantastic! Somewhere in the galaxy there may be an accountant carrying the memories of an ancient admiral." The ship shook. Every alarm on the bridge activated at once. "Barrier rupture accelerating," Orion announced. Ahead, the darkness inside Arcturus Gate split open. Something moved beyond it. Not one ship. Hundreds. The first hollow vessel emerged silently, larger than Seralyne's flagship. Its armor flexed as though breathing. Modern Imperial weapons fired immediately. Plasma beams struck its hull and vanished into rippling fields without leaving visible damage. Tarek swore. Seralyne's expression remained controlled. "All ships, defensive formation. Keep them away from the gate." More hollow vessels crossed the threshold. Ethan stared at their movement patterns. He knew them. Kael's memories supplied formations, weak points, command behavior. But something bothered Ethan. The ships were moving too perfectly. Every turn was synchronized to the millisecond. Every defensive adjustment happened simultaneously. He looked down at the engineering telemetry. Then he saw it. "They're not communicating like a fleet." Seralyne glanced at him. "Explain." "They're behaving like one machine." Orion brightened. "Collective synchronization confirmed." Ethan moved to the maintenance console, ignoring the tactical stations entirely. "If they're one system, they need diagnostics." Tarek looked at him as though he had lost his mind. "Diagnostics? Everything needs maintenance. The enemy is a civilization-ending biomechanical swarm." "Yes, Commander, and somewhere inside it is probably the equivalent of an error log." Ethan began opening ancient protocols buried in Kael's memories. Strange symbols became understandable as his hands moved. A frequency appeared. Orion reacted instantly. Quantum service channel detected. Ethan smiled. Seralyne looked at him. You found a weakness Kael missed. He was a warrior. And you? Ethan transmitted a test pulse toward the nearest hollow vessel. Its shields flickered. I fixed things. Another vessel emerged from the gate. Then 10 more. Ethan's smile disappeared.
Unfortunately, he said, first we may need to break them.
Ethan's first transmission did not destroy a hollow vessel. It made one hesitate. In the middle of a battle where every enemy ship moved with machine-perfect precision, that hesitation was enough to make the entire bridge fall silent. The nearest biomechanical cruiser drifted half a degree out of formation, its shields flickering like a wounded heartbeat. Orion reacted immediately. Synchronization interruption confirmed. Ethan leaned over the console. Then give me the full maintenance architecture. Archive fragmented. Of course it is. Seralyne stood at the center of the command deck, issuing orders while plasma fire crossed the dead star outside. Her long ears were pinned slightly back, her expression calm despite the Imperial fleet losing ships every minute. Can you do it? She asked. Ethan looked at the impossible code scrolling before him. A week ago, he would have answered with a joke and reached for a toolbox. Now the memories inside him no longer felt like an invasion. Kael's knowledge was there, but it waited rather than commanded. Ethan finally understood the difference. Yes, he said, but not from here. The ancient command station inside Arcturus Gate had survived for nearly 3,000 years. It was the only system powerful enough to broadcast through the Hollow Fleet's quantum service channel. Tarek objected immediately when Ethan volunteered to enter it. Seralyne objected more quietly, which Ethan found considerably more dangerous. You are not expendable, she told him. I know. Your tone suggests otherwise. Ethan smiled. My tone suggests I'm trying not to think about it. She studied him for a moment, then handed him her personal phase pistol. Bring that back. The weapon? No. Yourself. Ethan's humor vanished briefly. He nodded. A shuttle carried him through the battle while Imperial fighters carved a path between the hollow ships. Orion transferred into a portable projector beside him, complaining that Ethan's piloting technique violated 17 historical flight regulations. Kael flew like this, Ethan said. Commander Varos had authorization. Then retroactively authorize me. Request denied. You're becoming unpleasant. Historical personality adaptation may be occurring. Ethan stared at the sphere. That was not funny. I am experimenting. They reached the command station as the barrier dropped below 30%. Inside, the ancient halls awakened for Ethan without hesitation. He entered the central control chamber and saw Kael's final battlefield exactly as it had existed in his memories. The same black consoles, the same circular platform, the same view of Arcturus. Then someone applauded behind him. Senator Korvek stepped from the shadows. Ethan stared. I knew you were annoying. Treason is ambitious, though. Korvek's expression was cold. The continuity insignia glowed beneath his robes. For centuries, my ancestors protected the truth, while lesser civilizations stumbled through the dark. The Hollow Fleet can be controlled. With its power, the galaxy could finally have order. Ethan looked through the viewport at burning ships. You people really have a flexible definition of order. Korvek raised a weapon. Give me the command sequence. Kael's memories offered Ethan 12 ways to kill him. Ethan chose none. He triggered the station's local gravity system instead. Korvek rose helplessly toward the ceiling. Ethan looked up. Ancient warriors were dramatic. Technicians prefer switches. He locked the gravity field and returned to the console. Orion connected to the station. Barrier integrity, 19%. Then we do this now. The service channel opened. The Hollow Fleet appeared inside Ethan's mind as a vast network of synchronized signals. Kael's knowledge showed him how to attack it. Ethan's own experience showed him something better. He did not send a weapon. He sent corrupted maintenance instructions, endless diagnostic loops, contradictory repair commands, recursive system checks. Across the battlefield, hollow vessels began freezing in place. One by one, their shields collapsed. Seralyne's fleet struck. The darkness around Arcturus erupted with light. Korvek shouted from the ceiling, "You could command them!" Ethan kept typing. That was probably Kael's temptation too. "You carry his mind." "No," Ethan said. "I carry his mistakes." He transmitted the final sequence. The hollow network shattered. Thousands of biomechanical vessels disconnected from one another at once, becoming isolated machines instead of a single intelligence. Orion redirected the gate's remaining energy inward. The dimensional barrier folded around itself, sealing the rupture permanently. For several seconds there was only silence. Then Orion spoke. Arcturus gate closed. Ethan sat down slowly. Outside, the surviving hollow ships drifted powerless among the ancient wreckage. Seralyne's voice came through the communicator. "Ethan?" He closed his eyes. "Still here." Her relieved breath was almost a laugh. "And Korvek?" Ethan glanced upward. The senator was still floating angrily against the ceiling. "Also here, slightly elevated." Weeks later, the Continuity Council's archives were released across the galaxy. Their hidden influence collapsed almost overnight. Humanity's forgotten history became impossible to deny. Archaeologists discovered evidence of ancient human settlements on dozens of worlds, while Orion confirmed that the Silence Protocol had deliberately dismantled humanity's first interstellar civilization to keep the Hollow Fleet dormant. Ethan returned to Valora expecting interrogation. Instead, Seralyne offered him command of the newly created Ancient Systems Directorate. He stared at the appointment document. "I'm a technician. You repaired a civilization-ending war." It was mostly diagnostics. "That sentence is why you have the job." Ethan accepted on one condition. No one was allowed to call him Commander Varos. Orion immediately appeared beside the throne. "Understood, Commander Varos." Ethan looked at Seralyne. She laughed. The ancient combat drone beside the door dropped to one knee. Ethan closed his eyes. "I regret surviving." "Statement classified as humor," Orion said. "Finally learning." Later that evening, Ethan stood alone in the archive where everything had begun. Orion illuminated the ceiling with a newly recovered star map. Hundreds of distant points appeared beyond known space. "What are those?" Ethan asked. "Human repositories." "How many?" "Unknown." Ethan studied the lights. Once the idea would have frightened him, now it felt different. He no longer wondered whether he was becoming Kael Varos. Kael was dead. His memories were inheritance, not destiny. Ethan was still the man who repaired broken machines, made jokes at inappropriate times, and hated ceremonial uniforms. Only now, the machines waiting to be repaired were scattered across the galaxy. He picked up his old toolbox. "Which one is closest?" Orion highlighted a distant star. Ethan smiled. "Good. Let's go find out what my ancestors forgot to label."